Your inbox is killing your business, so today I'm building an AI chief of staff that reads my emails, predicts which clients are about to explode, and sends my team a complete brief of what to do before they even see a problem. And I'm doing it in real time using agentic workflows and Claude Code. So let's get into it. So the system is live. Let's see if it's sent it to Slack. There we go. Executive email briefing, irate clients 2, high risk, blah, 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 3 replies. So you can see here the first irate client is me, and then my email address, which has thankfully been blurred to the wonders of editing. But that was just me sending a test message. So it tells us the situation. The client, Tech Corp Industries, is experiencing a critical production outage, blah, blah, blah. It gives us a recommended strategy, acknowledge receipt of the email and express urgency in addressing the issue, immediately mobilize technical support to resolve the outage within a specified time frame, gather the necessary information for root cause analysis, blah, blah, blah. Very thorough, really. And then you can see recommended tone is obviously going to be empathetic at this point. You can never deny something that your servers absolutely didn't provide, especially if you drop the ball this long. Then finally, we have a draft response, which it aligns for us. And I would probably want to tailor this to some degree, especially if a client is this angry. You don't want to send them back something automated because that's only going to make them angrier. But then all we have to do is click on this button and it will open whatever we want in Gmail. Now, I haven't given this thing write access, so when I click on this button, it will open my email, but there'll be no draft because I have not given it write access. Something that you need to keep in mind is that if you do have multiple Gmail accounts on your system, if you click on this, it might open whichever one is your default one. So you need to keep that in mind. If I clicked on this, it would open my personal one, not my company one. But just for the sake of things, you can see here that it works. It's loading something. I've just blurred everything on the screen at the moment, so you can't see my personal inbox. But again, if I was a business and this was my business machine, it would have opened the correct one. So if we come back down to here, we can see it's listed the second client with the same thing. Sentiment is that they're frustrated. Subject is what's going on. The risk assessment is high. And again, it just explains everything. It gives us our drafts. And then it lists our routine emails. So these are things that aren't really important at all, just things that might have missed or things that could be important. So the sentiment here is excited. Implement multi-vector retrieval for image data in this new course. So sure, if it knows me, I'm an AI company, I'm super interested in understanding that sort of thing. So it knows excited is how I should feel when I see this email. Situation, deep learning AI is launching a new course on multi-vector image retrieval, blah, 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 blah. Obviously, we don't need to respond to that, but the point is I'm just trying to show you how you can actually set up to get your own little mini news feed into Slack or something like that. So if there are things that your clients are missing or things that your team has missed because they're overworked or they just don't understand certain tonality behind emails if they're junior or something like that, this system can avoid that. And avoidance is one of the best steps to obviously not lose your clients, because if you can get ahead of this, you can offer them things to make them feel better way earlier than if they're already super angry and they no longer want to do business with you. And we could come in here and we can add a whole bunch of features. You can pretty much get this thing to do whatever you want it to do. I will evolve this thing over time, and if I come up with anything that's super novel or amazing and I want to showcase it, I'll definitely make an update on this video, like I'm going to do for the sales outreach tool that I built. I've made that way more amazing since the video that I filmed a few days ago. But as long as you keep in mind that whatever you're doing in here, it's going to go through an LLM. So think about privacy, think about your clients, think about yourself and your own business. Before you do stuff like this, you can easily bake guardrails in here. One of the things that I would do is I would get VS Code to review it for any security gaps, things like that. And then what I might do is switch to using Gemini or another LLM to review that thing's review. So multi-stacking different LLMs to see different perspectives of security issues or issues that could affect my business or my well-being, privacy, PI, whatever. Different reviews are super important if you don't have your own software development team and things like that. Okay, so the first thing that we need to get into is a high-level overview of the system that we're actually building. In a previous video, I have actually winged the entire thing. You can watch that. It's a lot longer, but I figured for the sake of everyone's time, I'm going to do the planning ahead of time so that we can actually just get straight into the build and see this thing output our stuff in real time. So at a high level, what we're building here is an AI executive assistant. And you can see here, I've got it written down in Markdown. And then I'm going to show you how we're going to use this to actually build the thing that we want to get done. So the concept here is a 24/7 intelligent agent that doesn't just read your emails. It understands emotion, strategy, and the business risk behind whatever the hell is going on. It processes your inbox and delivers a strategic briefing to Slack. You could change it to Teams. You could essentially make it Telegram, WhatsApp, whatever you wanted to receive this input on. But it's a really cool thing to have, because if you have a massive company and you have clients that are really pissed off, and some of your sales team haven't picked that up yet, or even some of the language that the people are using within their emails signals that they're starting to think about churning or going to competitors and things like that, you can pick that up early on in the emails, and this system would do that for you. So the core workflow steps here, you have the fetcher, and its goal is to securely access our inbox. Pretty straightforward. Then we have the brain, and this is going to analyze everything in there. It's going to analyze our threads and things like that to figure out what it needs to send us, whether there's a churn risk, whether anyone is frustrated or angry, stuff like that. Third, we need the orchestrator, so this is actually going to run the process. And then finally, we have the action engines. So that's going to be someone sends us a Slack message. It's going to create a draft for us of how to respond to someone who's really pissed off or something like that. And then you can see down here, we've got the irate client detection. So this system hunts specifically for keywords like unacceptable, disappointed, third time, stuff like that. And then it makes a decision. So I'm not going to go through this whole thing for the sake of time. Then we have our tech stack. So we're going to use Python for the core logic. Now, again, you don't need to understand this. I will say though, if you're trying to sell this to customers or you want to make something production ready, you really do need to understand what you're implementing, because this thing could be writing anything for all you know. But then secondly, you need to understand what you're giving access to, and you also need to understand the privacy concerns behind it, because you are uploading all of this stuff to an LLM in order to analyze it. So not trying to be the fun police here, but to some degree, you need to understand what you're doing if you're planning on selling this thing. For me, I don't care. This is mostly in a test environment, and I do actually use it for day-to-day stuff because I've locked it down quite well with guardrails. So secondly, we're going to use the Gmail API. Now you can just give this read access, so it won't actually write anything or have any ability to do anything beyond reading your emails. We use OpenAI for the intelligence engine, although nowadays ChatGPT is not really that smart. And then we have Slack, the SDK, so that we can actually send botted messages to ourselves and interact with the system that we're going to be doing. And then I've added a few notes for phase 2 where we can make it better, but I don't want this video to trail on for too long. Okay, so here we are in VS Code. It doesn't matter what you use to program this. You can use anti-gravity. You can use any IDE out there. I just use this because anti-gravity's had a ton of problems lately. So just to give you a brief overview of what we're actually doing here, you need to have this orchestration prompt in here because this sets the scene for the entire build that we have. If you didn't watch my previous video, here is a quick recap. Essentially, the problem with LLMs is that they are mostly probabilistic, meaning one time they're going to give you an output that looks like this, another time it could be completely different. That doesn't really work when we're trying to solve business-specific problems, or actually most problems in life. So we need to try and make them more deterministic without ruining their ability to think, self-heal, and produce the results that we want without us having to put in much input. If you compare it to N8N, think about N8N as being, if I do this, then it happens, then it happens, then it happens, and it just does that in sequential order. Even if you add an LLM, it's not going to reason with itself, think and solve the problem, because that's not part of the chain. It is very deterministic despite having the probabilistic agents. It does not have the freedom of an agentic system where we can bake those same guardrails in, but if a mistake pops up, this thing knows, oh, there's a mistake. I need to figure out how this works in order to get to the end goal. It's very important to understand that. So what we've done down here is we've separated things into a few layers, and this is called the separation of concerns. And it's important to do that because then this thing knows how it needs to behave and where it needs to structure everything and the things that we need to actually get our job done. So the first thing is the process layer, and this is our standard operating procedures. You can think of these like the goals that we want to achieve. In this case, it's going to be to build this whole sentiment analysis thing. The second is the orchestration layer, which is the AI that will be doing all of this work for us. It's essentially the brain of the operation that is going to be moving between the standard operating procedure and the employees, which are the tools. So then the third layer, as I mentioned, are the tools, and these are going to be specific deterministic functions that get things done. So you can think of these like file operations. You can think of them as little scripts that have a specific purpose that help us achieve the goal of our standard operating procedure. The fourth thing is the configuration layer. So you can think of these like little files that have interchangeable things depending on the type of workflow that we're running. And you wouldn't want to hard code these into a Python script. You would generally just use some form of placeholder. So they're quite variable in that nature. Then we have the knowledge layer, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's knowledge that we need in order to complete a certain goal. And we put that in a separate folder so it can use it if it needs it. And then we have the prompt layer, and this is any prompts that the LLMs are going to use in order to complete their goal. And we can just reference them from this file instead of baking them into the Python code itself, which isn't really efficient. And then finally, just to save a bit of time, what this thing does is it self-heals, it learns from its problems, it goes through things, it knows not to overwrite without asking, basic security guardrails, and important structure to actually get this thing to do what we need it to do. Then finally, we have some file structures over here. So it puts everything on the left-hand side that you can see over here. That's created by the AI agent, and it creates a massive list as we expand over time. More and more of these things will be placed in here. I've got about 3 tools running in here at the moment, so they each run in their own little folder space. And then finally, we have the deliverables and the scratch work. And this is if I need hard-coded stuff sent to me or HTML files, things that I want to review. Those all go in there. Anyway, that's all you really need to know from this perspective. This is the brain for our entire operation, and it creates everything that we needed to create. This is our main agent. Okay, so next up, I'm going to open Claude Code. And all I'm going to do, so if I was doing this from scratch, I would come in here and I would talk through my thoughts, or I'd probably just plan ahead like I already did, because I'm so used to doing that. And then I would just chuck it in here and let it do its thing. So we're going to come in here and we're going to take this whole concept that we have explored. Just going to take it up to about, I don't want to grab the phase 2 stuff yet, so we can keep it here. And I'm just going to chuck it in here and I'm going to speak to it quickly. I want to build this sentiment analysis Slack bot. Check out my high-level overview below and help me implement this. Then I'm just going to paste it in. And we're going to see what this thing goes ahead and does. So this generally takes a while. You don't need to sit around and wait for it. If you've given yourself full permissions to let this thing run in the background and do whatever it wants to do, that is kind of high risk depending on how you've set the structure up. But for me, I don't care because, again, this is mostly just a dev environment that I use to run everything. So it doesn't matter if anything goes wrong. So in an ideal world, this thing, because I've given it so much context to begin with, I've given it the tools that it probably wants to use, I've given it a lot of stuff of how we're going to get this done, it's a lot easier for it to think. Whereas if we were just going in there blind, it would do a lot more planning. You can see here it's created our to-do lists, everything that it needs to do, and it will go through these things one by one until it achieves the goal that we need. You can see it here creating some files that we need on the side. And then it will ask you for permissions from time to time for specific tasks. I just click yes. Obviously, you need to use your own discretion. But the goal is to get this thing done as fast as possible and with as least friction as possible. I'm not going to do any coding in here. I'm not going to do anything that I need to do apart from speaking to this thing. For the purpose of time in this video, I'm probably going to cut a lot of this stuff. If you want to see this whole lengthy procedure of how it thinks, you can watch my much longer video, which is over an hour, and I run through the whole build. But for the most part, we're just going to be looking at the different high-level steps involved with this process. Okay, so you can see it's done a whole bunch of stuff here so long. A lot of these are from my other workflows, but here we have one fetch emails.py. So here's our Python script that's going to go ahead and fetch all of the emails. If we come down here to SOPs, we should see email digest. So if you look through the way that this thing thinks, it's pretty awesome because it looks for any existing work like previous SOPs that I have or previous employees. It looks at their layouts so that it makes sure it mimics the exact flow of how it did that for the new one. So here's our complete SOP. The goal: process Gmail inbox to identify high-risk emails, analyze sentiment and urgency, generate strategic recommendations, create draft responses, and deliver an executive briefing to Slack with one-click actions. Then it breaks down what gets delivered line by line, the inputs that we need, the employees that it's going to be using. So it maps the SOP to the employees folder, and those are just the Python tools if you remember. So you can see here how that initial prompt that we have blends the deterministic nature with the probabilistic things that we need from an LLM model. Because if this thing hits a roadblock, oh, I haven't done this, I need to do this instead to make that happen. And this should become more apparent once I start diving into this, because there's no way this thing's going to work one shot out the box. I haven't added my API keys yet, and I haven't added a few other things purposefully because I want to show you guys how fast this thing can learn. And I just want to add a few more bits of information to the video rather than just show you a completed product. So you can see here the last thing that it's doing is creating us some setup documentation. And this is the amazing thing. So whenever I run through these, they always give these really helpful docs where it's literally like, click this button, go here, do this, and that's how we're going to make this work. So it really does everything for you. You don't even need to research the final missing pieces that do require human input. Okay, this thing thinks that it's finished. What we built: 4 new employees, the fetch emails, analyze emails, post to Slack, and create Gmail drafts. Then the main orchestrator is the run email digest, which we've got open on the right. And then it created some documentation, complete process SOP, setup guide with troubleshooting. Cool, let's open that one and have a look. And then it has a quick start guide, which is also really valuable, so you don't need to read any of that stuff. Set up your Slack bot. So we need to go to our Slack apps and we need to create a new API with chat write public. I guess it depends on how you want to send it to yourself, whether you want a private message to yourself, whether you want to send it to a group chat, something like that. And then we need to add our API keys to our .env file. So I'm not going to open this file because it's got all my API keys in and just saves my editor a few clicks. But inside this .env is all the API keys for anything that my system runs. So whether it's the Slack bot or whether it's Perplexity or OpenAI nodes, stuff like that, it all lives in env, and then your scripts will just reference that. So that's where we stash stuff and why it's asking us to do that. And then it just gives us a few ways of how we can actually use this thing. So that's pretty cool. It's built in some triggers that we can use in terms of responses. So when it's drafting, you see here we've got switches for create drafts, drafts only, irate, and then use empathetic. So if we want to take a specific tonality when we're replying to people, we can set that trigger here, which is pretty cool because I didn't even ask for that. Then it tells us the key features that it implemented: irate client detection, urgency scoring, sentiment analysis, blah, blah, blah. Shows me the file structure of where it's stashed everything, and then it tells us the next steps, and it aligns with the architecture that I originally gave it. So that's amazing. Off the bat, this thing looks like it's done a great job, but obviously we need to test if this really works. So off screen, I'm quickly going to load in my API keys and set everything up, and then we'll come back to this and then get it to send a few Slack messages. So here I am in my Slack menu, and I'm just adding the scope permissions so that the bot can actually do what it needs to do. It's very simple to do this. You just click on the link that the system gives you. It'll take you into your Slack API menu, and you just do exactly what the thing tells you, which is add a few permissions in there so that it can send the messages that we need to send. So let's look at the final two. So I need to add chat write, which I think I've got, and then chat write public. So let's add chat write public. Cool. And that's it. Then you need to reinstall this to your workspace, which is just a button further up on the screen. If I scroll up, I'm going to reveal my API keys, so I'm not going to do that on screen, but it's super simple. So one thing that it didn't do is set up my OAuth credentials for Gmail, because I've already done that in a previous workflow. So all we would need to do is we would need to go into our Google Cloud console. It shows you over here, and you can set up a new OAuth token. You just chuck the JSON credentials in here and it will implement it into your workflow. So again, super simple. I just can't show you that screen because obviously it will reveal everything, and also I've already done it. So it is baked in here, and that's how it's going to communicate between reading my emails and then posting stuff to Slack. Okay, so now that we're all set up, I've come into Slack and I've just created a new group called Red Alert. And then obviously I'm in here, and I've invited my email digest bot, which is just the name of the bot that sends us these alerts. You can have it sent to you privately as a DM. That's what I did the first time I ran this thing. Otherwise, you can have it in a group, which might make more sense for you as a business, especially if you have large teams and you want to get like the whole of C-level or the whole of crisis management, whoever that special A team is that solves all your problems, you would want to get them into a group so they can see the stuff automatically and get notified. So then the only thing left to do is to test this thing. So let's see if it works. Scan through the last 30 hours of my email inbox and tell me what's up. Maybe I should tell it that we need to test it. Let's test it. So now it's going to go away and do its thing, and hopefully it shouldn't run into any roadblocks. If it does run into roadblocks, obviously we can just fix them by speaking to this thing. So again, you don't really need to understand all of this stuff, as long as you understand what you're giving up or sacrificing by not understanding this stuff. So that's a super important distinction that you need to have when you're building this way. If you're not going to apply critical thinking, you need to understand that there's massive risk involved with that. Here it wants me to sign in. So we're going to sign in with atomicOps. And yes, I want to allow it. So authorization is complete. Now if we go back to our workflow, it's considering a bunch of things. It'd be interesting to see if this works because it's going via the credentials that I used for another app, which I didn't give it all permissions for, but maybe it didn't need those. Anyway, great. OAuth worked. We've got 3 emails. I can see a very irate email from Sarah Chen, who's an imaginary person I made up yesterday at 9 p.m. And then we have another email from a frustrated person who's not hearing back from someone. This is urgent, but not critical. So it's going through here, and now what it's going to do is it's going to start using all of its employees and align with whatever we want from the standard operating procedure. So if you remember from the SOP, what we wanted is for it to do the analysis for us to figure out how we can stop this from churning, to create an empathetic response, whatever the thing is that we need. So if we come over here to our employees, you'll see in one of these .py files to OpenAI so that it can actually do the thing that it needs to do. Then, hopefully, if all of this has worked, it should send us back a really nice message in our Slack group. So you can see above here, it ran into an issue while it was trying to do this, while it was analyzing the emails. And then it just self-corrected it. Fixed. Now let's analyze your emails. So it's going through everything. Email intelligence report, summary, total 3 emails, blah, 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 critical, email 1, production outage. So this again is the imaginary situation where these people hadn't heard from anyone in a while and they have a massive production outage from a SaaS product that they're using. So they're super angry about that, as someone would be. It gives a list of recommended actions. And now we should see if these get sent to our Slack. Okay, so it didn't send anything to our Slack because it doesn't have our channel ID. So we need to go in here. We need to go channel details. And if we go over here, copy the channel ID, let's go back into VS Code and we say, cool, send it to Slack channel ID. Let's do it. So now depending on where you paste this, obviously you can have something more interactive or less interactive. Sometimes it takes a bit of fine tuning, like it thinks that it sent this interactive report, but it didn't get all of the things correct in terms of the buttons that it can actually use within Slack. So that was one of the problems I ran into when I tested this yesterday. But again, I just prodded it until it did what I wanted it to do, and then it worked. But other than that, you can get the code that you need in order to build this entire agentic workflow and any other agentic workflows in the description below. If you liked the video, please leave a like. It helps the channel. Otherwise, some comments below. Or check the videos on the screen now because they'll definitely help you on your journey. Thanks for watching.